Spiritually awake people don't think the same way most of us do. Their mind doesn't rush to judge, to defend, or to worry. They've learned to give space between what happens and how they respond. That space is where peace begins. For most people, the mind feels like a constant storm, jumping from one memory to another, from fear to desire, from what was to what might be. It never stops trying to control life, hoping that if it thinks hard enough, it will finally feel safe. But the awakened person has seen that control is an illusion. They no longer try to think their way to peace. They allow peace to appear when the mind becomes quiet. This doesn't mean they stop thinking. It means they've stopped believing everything the mind says. They can watch a thought appear without getting trapped inside it. They can notice fear rising without letting it rule their next move. To them, thoughts are like clouds passing through a clear sky, seen, but not mistaken for the sky itself. What changes is not the amount of thought, but the relationship with it. While most people use their thoughts to escape the moment, the awakened use awareness to return to it. They don't analyze every situation for hours. They sense what feels true and act from that stillness inside. When you're not spiritually awake, your thinking often feels like quicksand. The more you struggle to find certainty, the deeper you sink into doubt. You try to fix every feeling with ideas, but ideas can't fix what only presence can heal. That's why awakening begins when you realize that peace doesn't come from thinking, it comes from seeing. Spiritually awake people think with presence, not with fear. They don't plan from anxiety, they act from awareness. They can think clearly because their mind isn't full of noise. It's not that they've erased their emotions, they've learned not to drown in them. You can feel it when you're around someone like that. They don't rush to respond. They listen, they pause, and when they speak, there's weight behind their words, not the weight of effort, but of clarity. They don't argue to win, they speak to understand. For them, thinking isn't about control. It's about connection. They think in a way that cooperates with life instead of resisting it. They know that every situation, even the difficult ones, carries something sacred. And so, their thoughts no longer fight reality, they move with it. When you begin to awaken, you start noticing how much of your thinking comes from fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of not being enough, fear of what others will say. But awareness begins to shine through, and you start to see fear for what it is, just a voice pretending to protect you. The more you observe it, the less power it has. To think like the awake is to live with lightness. You stop turning every moment into a problem to solve. You stop arguing with life. Instead, you begin to listen. You begin to trust that there's an intelligence in life far greater than your thoughts. And that intelligence starts guiding you. The awake person doesn't need to control the future because they've made peace with the present. They no longer ask, "What will happen to me?" but, "What is life showing me right now?" They understand that awareness, not certainty, is what brings freedom. That's why their mind feels different. It's quiet, but alive. Thoughts arise, but they don't disturb the silence underneath. That silence becomes the foundation of every decision, every word, every step forward. To think like the awake is to realize that your mind is not who you are. It's a tool, not your identity. When you see that, you stop obeying every thought as if it were truth. You begin to live from something deeper, a quiet intelligence that doesn't argue, doesn't rush, and doesn't fear. And that's the beginning of a new kind of freedom. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within it. Because when you no longer fight your own thoughts, you finally make peace with life itself. To think like someone who is spiritually awake is to stop treating every thought as an emergency. When a problem appears, they don't rush to fix it. They breathe, they wait, and they listen. Because they know that not every storm needs to be fought, some just need to pass. Most people think because they're afraid of what will happen if they stop. They overanalyze, replay conversations, and imagine every possible outcome. Their mind feels like a spinning wheel that never rests. But the awakened have learned something simple and profound. The moment you stop forcing the mind to find peace, peace finds you. An awakened person still uses thought, but they no longer depend on it to feel safe. They trust something deeper, a quiet knowing that lives beneath the noise. When that inner stillness becomes familiar, thoughts lose their power to control emotions. They stop being walls and start becoming windows. It's not that awake people never feel pain or confusion. They do. The difference is that they don't build stories around them. They let the feeling rise, they feel it fully, and they let it pass. They don't turn pain into identity. They don't make sadness a name tag. For them, thinking is a way to understand, not to escape. When they reflect, they do it with curiosity, not with fear. They ask questions like, "What is this moment teaching me?" instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" That small shift changes everything, from victimhood to awareness, from confusion to insight. You can feel that difference. When you meet someone who thinks from awareness, their energy is calm. They don't compete for attention. They don't need to be right. They listen deeply, because they care more about understanding than defending. Even silence feels comfortable with them. When you are not awake, silence can feel threatening. You fill it with chatter, with noise, with endless planning. But for the awakened, silence is not emptiness, it's clarity. It's the space where truth becomes audible. In that silence, thinking becomes something new. It's no longer about calculating outcomes, but about sensing direction. Awakened people think with intuition. They trust the natural rhythm of life the way the ocean trusts its waves. They don't need to know what comes next to feel at peace right now. When they make decisions, they don't overanalyze. They feel into the decision, like a musician listening for the next note. If it feels aligned, they move. If it feels forced, they wait. They understand that waiting can be an action too. Awakened thinking is slow and deep, not because it lacks passion, but because it respects timing. It doesn't rush to conclusions. It doesn't fear not knowing. It knows that clarity comes naturally when you stop chasing it. To think like the awake is to see every thought as a messenger, not a master. Even fear carries a message. There is something here you haven't yet understood. Even anger whispers, there is pain behind this wall. The awakened listen to these messages without judgment. They don't push them away, they learn from them. Their relationship with thought is compassionate. They don't fight the mind, they befriend it. They've realized that healing doesn't come from silencing the mind, but from understanding it. They sit with their own noise until the noise softens on its own. This is why they rarely feel lost for long. Because even when they don't know the answer, they trust the silence that holds the answer. Their thinking no longer comes from fear of the unknown, it comes from faith in the present. They have learned that peace doesn't come from controlling thoughts, but from no longer identifying with them. You don't need to believe every voice in your head. You can observe it and decide which one speaks truth. That choice, the choice to witness rather than react, is the beginning of awakening. Spiritually awake people see the world differently because they think differently. They don't see problems, they see lessons. They don't see enemies, they see mirrors. They don't see chaos, they see patterns trying to bring life into balance. Their mind interprets reality not through fear, but through understanding. And that understanding brings humility. They know they don't control life. They know they are part of something larger, something that breathes through them, moves through them, and guides them without needing their permission. So they stop struggling, and in that surrender, their thoughts become light again. They can think about the past without drowning in regret. They can imagine the future without fearing it. Their mind no longer lives in yesterday or tomorrow. It flows with what is. And because of that, even simple things become sacred. A walk, a meal, a conversation, all are moments of awareness. Their mind is not elsewhere. It's here, present, fully alive. That's the real difference. The awakened don't escape the mind. They transform it into a vessel for consciousness. You don't need to be perfect to think this way. You just need to start noticing. Notice your thoughts, not to judge them, but to see them. Notice how often they come from fear or habit. And then pause, breathe, and let awareness look through them. Soon you'll see that you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. And when you realize that, you begin to think like someone who is truly awake. When you start to awaken, something subtle but powerful happens. Your thoughts begin to slow down. You start to notice what's behind them, the quiet awareness that has always been there. And for the first time, you realize that peace was never missing. It was simply covered by too much noise. Spiritually awake people live from that quiet place. They don't try to escape life, they let life pass through them. They still feel pain, loss, joy, and love, but none of it owns them anymore. Their thinking becomes gentle, not because they've become passive, but because they've stopped fighting reality. They know that every moment carries its own truth. Even when things seem wrong, they trust that something within the experience is guiding them home. They don't label events as good or bad so quickly. They let time, silence, and awareness reveal the meaning. When you are awake, you stop thinking of life as something to win or figure out. You start to see it as something to participate in. You stop asking, "What do I get from this?" and begin asking, "What is this showing me?" That shift changes everything. It turns suffering into wisdom and confusion into clarity. The awakened person thinks less about me and more about we. Their thoughts are not self-centered, they are life-centered. They care about harmony more than control, truth more than opinion. Their mind doesn't divide the world into mine and yours, because they see everything as part of the same living whole. This doesn't mean they walk around in constant bliss. It means that even when the world seems chaotic, they don't lose balance. They see chaos as part of the dance, not as an enemy. They know that what looks like destruction is often the start of transformation. When they love without trying to possess. Their love is free, not built on control or expectation. They understand that love grows in freedom, not in fear. They can hold someone close without needing to keep them forever. Because they know, nothing that is real can ever be lost. This kind of thinking changes everything about how they relate to others. They don't try to convince people to see what they see. They don't argue about truth. They simply live it, quietly, through their presence. Their calmness becomes their message. You might have noticed that around some people, you feel at peace even if they say nothing. That's what happens when someone's mind is quiet inside. Their silence is not empty, it's alive. It speaks without words. It reminds you of what you've forgotten, that you too are that stillness beneath all thought. The awakened see the mind as a servant of the heart. They let awareness lead, and thought follows. Their intelligence is balanced with compassion. They don't use knowledge to separate themselves, they use it to connect. That's what true wisdom feels like. It unites instead of divides. If you listen closely to an awakened mind, you won't hear perfection. You'll hear honesty. You'll hear acceptance. You'll hear the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Because when you awaken, the need to prove disappears. Only the need to be real remains. Their thinking has one purpose, to align with truth, not to manipulate it. They think not to control life, but to understand their place within it. Every thought becomes an act of awareness, every silence an act of trust. They live as if life itself were thinking through them, and perhaps it is. The awakened person doesn't seek meaning in distant answers. They find it here, in the breath, in the small details most people overlook. A falling leaf, a passing smile, a quiet morning, all become teachers. Their thinking slows down enough to notice the sacred hidden in the ordinary. When you begin to think like this, you stop rushing through life. You stop chasing outcomes and start living moments. You understand that happiness was never at the finish line. It was always in the step you're taking right now. You realize that the mind's job was never to control the world, only to witness it with love. And that is how spiritually awake people think. Not above the world, but through it. Not as dreamers escaping life, but as souls deeply awake within it. Their mind becomes a mirror, clear, open, and calm, reflecting life as it is. The truth is, awakening doesn't change the world around you. It changes how you see it. The noise remains, but it no longer disturbs you. The chaos continues, but you no longer resist it. You see that everything, even confusion, belongs. And in that realization, something beautiful happens. You stop searching for peace, because you've become it. You stop trying to find meaning, because you live it. You stop needing to understand, because awareness itself is enough. That's what it means to be awake, not to escape the mind, but to see through it. To live as presence, to think with clarity, and to love without fear. When that happens, thinking is no longer a prison. It becomes freedom itself, the mind resting in harmony with the heart, and life flowing effortlessly through both.